I felt not naive. I felt bulletproof.
Yeah.
I felt bulletproof at the time. I felt that actually I had right on my side. I was idealistic, and I felt the people that I was writing stories on were people who were doing bad things, and I needed to hold these people to account. I still do that now.
From Ministry of Work, welcome to Greater Manchester's Greatest Minds podcast, a show about Greater Manchester's pioneers, entrepreneurs and visionaries, and the stories that brought their ideas to life. Today we're joined by Chris Maguire. He's an award-winning journalist and editor of over 30 years, having always dreamt of becoming a journalist from being just 9 years old. He has an extensive and varied background, from being one of the very first journalists covering the Fred and Rose West case, through to hosting over 2,000 business events. Chris is now the owner and executive editor of BusinessCloud and TechBlast, operating right here in Manchester, but covering business stories throughout the UK.
Well, born in 1972, I'm a twin, the eldest by 1 minute. So my twin brother's called Eddie. Born in Canterbury.
Great name, should I
Eddie,
add,
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Are you an Edward or an Ed?
I'm an Edward, yeah.
Yeah. Ed's an Edward, but he's an Eddie. Hates the term Edward. I don't like the term Christopher, even though that's my LinkedIn name. Grew up in Kent. My dad is from a mining family. He was air ventilation officer. Mum worked for the civil service, and quite idyllic. Went to a grammar school. Never went to university. Love cricket. That's basically my entire life summed up.
In one.
So
what, I guess when you were growing up, was there any intention to go to university? Not?
No, there was, when you grow up in a family and they say, nobody from our family's been to university, that was our family.
That was my family as well.
Absolutely. There was never any pressure to go to university either, to be fair. I had the grades to go to university, but I wanted to be a journalist from about the age of about 9. And my brother, he went to university. I think Eddie would say he probably went to university not necessarily to get the education, but to get the education of life.
Sure.
And he succeeded in that.
Fair enough. So you made a really interesting point there. You've wanted to be a journalist since how old?
Yeah, really young, actually. Really young. So
that's unusual.
Yeah, very young. When you go to school and you go to a careers convention and everyone says, what do you want to be? And I always said, I'll be a journalist. And everybody else said, I want to be a fire engine driver. I want to be a railway, driver. I want to be a footballer. I never did. I wanted to be a journalist.
Why?
And a couple of reasons, really, I think. I had an experience quite young. I was about 9. I was with Eddie. We were staying at our nan's. We spent the summer holiday with her. We went to a library and we were just trying to keep ourselves busy. And there was a comic called Tiger Magazine. And there was a joke of the day. There's a joke page and people used to write in with their picture jokes. And there was this, and I said to Eddie, I said, let's do it. We can win a £5. £5 back then, a lot of money. And so I did about 30 and my brother Eddie did 1. And Eddie's was a rugby clubhouse, and on the side of the rugby clubhouse were the rugby posts, and there was a bell in the middle, and there was a guy standing next to a ball with his dog, and it said to ring bell, kick ball. And my brother did that, and I said to Eddie, Eddie, that's rubbish. I said, that's really bad. I said, I wouldn't bother entering that. You're wasting your time. Being a slightly older brother, he accepted that. So I shoved it in with my entries. So I shoved all 31 in.
Brilliant.
Sent them to Tiger, went down to the newsagents 2 weeks later, and there it was. Picture of a rugby clubhouse with a rugby post on the side and the doorbell by Chris Maguire, and I felt complete and utter pride. I see my name in a national publication, and zero guilt
and plagiarism,
and zero guilt. So I thought I'm probably got all the right hallmarks of being a journalist.
So that is still a really young age to be very determined about what. Did you understand what it was at that point?
Yeah.
Or was it just like you've got your name on paper and that's cool?
Yeah, my dad. God bless him. My dad did a Daily Telegraph reader, so I always used to read the Daily Telegraph. This is, for the young Gen Zs out there before the internet. We used to read newspapers, and I used to devour it. Massive avid reader. My dad would the football results the day before. He'd write me a note and leave it outside because he was up at 5 o'clock. He'd leave it outside my door. Sunderland 1, Tottenham 2, stuff like that.
Yeah,
they were the old days. And I loved newspapers. And actually, I found myself. I use it curious. I think I'm curious as opposed to nosy. And whenever I give talks to journalism students, I always say to people, right, you're driving down the road, you're stuck in traffic, okay, and you can see an accident, okay, and that's what's causing the delay. I said, if you drive past that accident and you're not interested to find out what's caused the delay, you shouldn't be a journalist. But if you want to find out what's caused the delay and how those people are involved in the accident, that's the sign of being a journalist. You know, if you live somewhere and you see a planning application and you're not interested to find out what's going to be built in the street next to you, you shouldn't be a journalist. I always wanted to find out what was being built next to me. So I went to night school at about the age of 13 to learn T-line, which is form of shorthand.
Yeah.
And I'd go to Dover, and I was the only male in there. Everybody else was female, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They all talked to me. They, little old Chris, 13-year-old, did work experience every year for 3 or 4 years, set up a school newspaper at 15. So everyone thought I'd be a journalist, but that creates its own pressure. But I always felt it was, I don't know, religious people talk about callings. That was my calling.
Yeah. Did you feel the pressure? Like, did you feel like you'd kind of made a rod for your own back, like you almost had to become a journalist, or has it just genuinely been like that calling, that passion?
No, it's generally been a calling and a passion. See, I had quite an interesting situation when I was young. So when I was a kid, I had a really bad speech impediment. I had a stutter. And my dad, a lovely guy. And my dad, he'd say it himself, he was old school. So, I'd say something to dad, and dad would stutter back at me because he thought that was the best way to avoid me stuttering.
Right.
Yeah. You want a cup of tea, Dad? And yeah. And my dad would stutter back. And then I went to elocution lessons and I had to try and speak slower, which is why when I hear people with a speech impediment, you can pick it up straight away. I've still got a speech impediment in my mind. So I went to elocution lessons with Mrs. Ennolds. What I realised actually, and I was at school one day and I was in a cookery class, and the teacher, for the benefit of the listeners, I've got a big head. I've got a big head. You don't have to laugh with me, Eddie, but no, I have got a big head and I'm very proud of it. Lots of advertising based on this.
Grew it yourself.
Lots of advertising based on this forehead. My dad used to cut me and my brother's hair. He didn't use a bowl, didn't need to. It was just straight across the top. So I had a big head, bold haircut, and a stutter. I was top. I was a big attraction at school. And then I was in his class and I was sitting at the front, and I was always a kid who picked my hand up to ask a question. And I picked my hand up one day, and this teacher said, Chris, can you move your big head like that? It's the only time I ever cried at school.
Yeah,
the only time I ever cried. I ran out of school. I ran out of class. She apologised. I never spoke about it. Never mentioned it to mum and dad because you didn't. You didn't go back to mum and dad. If I went back to my dad and said I've been told off by an adult, with no questions asked, it was
getting
exactly because you respect your elders. Yeah. So I never told anybody, but it was the only thing I've ever been really angry about. But what I realised actually was, the only way you deal with something like that is to face it, is to confront it. So I took every opportunity I have from then to speak. And then eventually, the more you speak, the more confident you get. So in a strange way, it probably helped me.
There's some irony in it. Like, obviously, those early experiences are now, like, literally part of your key role is public speaking, isn't it? And you are well renowned for being very good at it.
Yeah, I do. I've done like 2,000 or 3,000 events.
Wow.
But the thing is, when you've got a speech impediment, whenever you step up on a stage, it's always at the back of your mind. And I had a stutter. So you could always imagine the word you were going to stutter on, even though it was 3 sentences ahead of what you were going to say. So the idea is you try and speak a little bit slower. The key is always preparation in my job. So whenever I do any event, I prepare for it. That's probably what I'm known for.
Yeah.
And journalism fundamentally is about taking yourself out of your comfort zone. So every time I speak to people like you, or I speak to people on the phone, or I speak to people at events, you're taking yourself out of your comfort zone. But it all goes back to that experience I had in that cookery lesson, like 42 years ago or something like that.
Yeah,
actually 39 or something.
But it's interesting because it's probably formed in a lot of what you do today.
Yeah, and the thing is that, like, I see a lot of young people today. I'm a big advocate of mental health. It's huge. Back in I'm older than you. Back in my day, my mum literally would say, if you fall out of that tree and break your leg, don't come running to me. That would be it. And she'd give it a rub and you're on your way. And we live in a different world now, and I'm not saying it's the worst world, but you just got on with it. I'm not advocating what this particular teacher did. It was horrible. It's horrible. But in a way, it was tough love, and
Mm.
it didn't do me any harm in the long run. If that happened to my kid, I'd react completely differently.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So obviously, growing up, then you've actually started studying pretty early in terms of going to do that
Yeah,
course when you're
yeah.
13 and so on. How did you first get then what you'd call a proper job in journalism?
Well, I went to Harlow College. See, my aspiration from a long time was to go to Harlow College. So they had an NCTJ approved course, National Council for Training of Journalists. So back then, if you wanted to be a journalist, you had to get the NCTJ pre-entry certificate. And there were only 3 or 4 colleges around the country that did it. Harlow was the best. I think Piers Morgan went there, but I don't want to hold that against anyone else went
Yeah.
there. So I wanted to go to Harlow. So I went to Harlow at 18. So what I didn't want to go to university for.
Mhm.
My view very early on was, why do I want to go to university when I know what I want to do
Yeah,
now?
you can go straight to that.
Yeah, so I lived in Diggs. My dad dropped me off and said, "Right, you're on your own now, son. Work for me." Uh, did 9 months there, and you qualify. You do your shorthand, you do your law, you do your public administration, you do all of that, and then you get your pre-entry certificate, and then you start applying for jobs. So that would have been in 1990, which the more mature listener will remember was another economic downturn, and there weren't many jobs to go for. So I applied for every job that was going, and I applied for a job at the Herald and Post newspaper with a lady called Sue Fisher, and 2 other people on my course applied for the job, and they got offered the job before me. And the first person turned it down, the second person turned it down, and then Sue came on the phone to me and she said, "Chris," she said, "I've got to be honest, you're not our first choice." I said, "I'm not your second choice, Sue. I know that for a fact." She said, "I'm your third choice." And she said, "But we'd like to offer you the job, £5,884 a year. Would you want it?" I said, "Absolutely, 100%." Because I've never been proud ever, and if the opportunity's there, take it.
Well, exactly, and
Yeah,
that's the first rung on the ladder, right?
yeah,
It doesn't
yeah.
matter what it is. What sort of stuff were you reporting on at that stage?
Well, I remember my first day. I was covering places like Hoddesdon, Cheshunt, Enfield, North London, that area, from an office in Bishop Stortford, which was like 35 miles away. And I remember that I went in on the Monday, and they said, "Right, what's your front page lead?" I said, "When do you need it for?" I said, "Tuesday." I said, "It's Monday." And they said, "Yeah, we need a page 1, page 3, page 5, page 7, page 9 story from you." I thought, right, okay, try not to panic.
Yeah.
And he said, "You can go to police calls." You went to police calls in Enfield, in North London. And I remember the inspector was a guy called Inspector Brian Bentley, which is like a long time ago. And you write down everything that happens. I mean, you're an ex-policeman yourself,
Mhm.
actually. And I remember writing everything down. And because I was so nervous about making a mistake, I phoned him up and I said, "Brian, can I just check?" I said, "You know that car that got broken into? You said it was a driver's side window, didn't you?" "Yes." "Definitely wasn't the passenger side window." "No." And I said, "All right, just checking." And then, "Brian, you mentioned about that robbery and such." "Yeah, can I just check? You said 10 o'clock. It wasn't 11 o'clock, was it?" He said, "No, definitely 10 o'clock." I did this about 5 times, phoned him up. He was getting sick of me. He must have been. But he said, "Chris, can I give you a piece of advice?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't make me sound like an idiot." He used stronger words than that. "But you can say what you want. Just be as accurate as you can." And that was my experience. And I think the front page lead that I did was a robbery at a laundrette.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. But the second week, I think the second week, it may even be in the first week, there was a guy called Mr. Fish. I'm not great with names, but I remember that name, Mr. Fish, and he was climbing up a ladder at Tesco's in Cheshunt, and he fell off his ladder, landed on his head, and died. And it was an horrendous experience for his family. And
And him.
yeah, and most definitely Mr. Fish, yeah. And I went to his house to speak to his family, try and get a tribute piece. It's called a door knock. You'll know what it's like
Yeah,
as a
been there, done
policeman.
that, sadly.
Yeah, it's horrible,
Mm.
because you don't know that person behind the door, but you know you're going to change that person's life, more so for you than me. So when you do a door knock and you're asking to do a tribute about somebody, it can go one of 2 ways. The way everybody imagines it will go is it'll be horrendous, and they'll shout and they'll swear and they'll chase you down the road because he wants to be stopped. But the other way is they'll actually open their door to you because they want to talk to somebody and they want to tell other people through you,
Mm.
which means they haven't got to tell other people. And Mrs. Fish opened up a door, and she was so incredibly nice. And I gave her so many reasons to walk away from me. I literally said, "You won't want to speak to me, Mrs. Fish. Chris Maguire here, Herald and Post. Looking to do a tribute piece. Chris, come on in." She was
Mm.
so nice. And that taught me a really good lesson in like my first week in journalism, that actually you've got a job to do. Don't assume what the reader or what the member of the public is going to say.
Yeah, because I suppose journalism does have a bad rep in a lot of
Yeah.
spaces, doesn't it?
Uh, some of it justifiably.
Yeah.
I think the thing is with the media and the journalists generally is I would say 99%, 98%, but certainly the vast majority of journalists are top draw.
Mm.
You know, they mean they're people like you
Yeah,
and
they're
me.
trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. The problem you've got is especially now, you've got one or two, a small minority who create really bad headlines by doing really awful things, and it
Well,
ties it for the rest of us.
And funnily enough, you can almost carbon copy that statement
Yeah.
there for the police, actually,
Yeah.
from my experience.
Yeah.
As things progressed then, like I know one of the big cases that you worked on was
Yeah.
Fred and Rose West, for
Yeah.
example. So
Yeah.
tell me a bit about that. That must have been a bit
Yeah,
surreal.
I'm always mindful in terms of the audience that we both know the Fred and Rose West case, but there was I was working at the Gloucestershire Echo in Cheltenham, and I remember, and I was working as a district reporter in Tewkesbury, and get a call at head office to say that police were investigating, they're digging up a garden, or they're looking for, I think it was Heather West, who was their 16-year-old daughter, and she'd gone missing, and they were digging up the back garden. We didn't know the background that we know now.
Yeah.
And I remember Martin Williams, who was a colleague of mine, went to the front door, and this guy came to the front door, big curly hair, heavily set, huge, like calloused hands, huge arms, very, very, very West Country like accent. And he said to Martin Williams, and I can't do impressions, he said, they're saying I've harmed my daughter. I would never harm my daughter. I love my kids, etc., etc. And that was Fred West. And he never spoke to any journalists other than that one time. And I remember the news editor at the time, a guy called John Flint, God bless him. He used to work at the Mirror, he died. And he said, Chris, this story is going to run and run. I said, what makes you say that? He said, I can tell.
Just intuition.
I can tell it's going to run and run. Like I was, 21 years of age. And then on the Saturday, before they found any bodies, I got sent to 25 Cromwell Street. And I get sent there, and it's chucking down with rain. And if you can visualise Cromwell Street, you can visualise the building. I parked my car at the front of the house. There was no press there at all. And went around the back of the house, and it was cordoned off with a police tape. But there was one policeman who clearly wanted to be anywhere else other than there. And I said to him, excuse me, sir. I said, Chris Maguire here, Gloucestershire Echo. I said, doing a follow-up story, just wondering if anything's happening. Like you could do that now. And he said some of the lines he said, and he didn't mean it. He says, just dead. He says, dead round here. He said, nothing happening. And then from where I was standing, they found Heather's West body. I think it had been put into a wheelie bin, I think, cut in half, I think, as well. It's really, really sad. Like 4 feet away from where I was standing. And they found the body. And then by the following week, Cromwell Street was awash with media from all over the world. I remember journalists from Japan, which was really weird. They were there, and then, everybody became a celebrity in a strange way. The superintendent who was leading the investigation became a celebrity. Fred West's solicitor became a celebrity. The people who lived in Cromwell Street wanted to sell their stories to the media, so they became a celebrity. And somewhere along the line, people forgot what this was about, which was the victims.
It's fascinating that happens, isn't it, with big cases like that?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think but there wasn't. This was like 1994, 94, I think. Before there wasn't social media like we had today. Now you post something that would go around the world in seconds. You didn't have that. But it was interesting how that story gathered pace. I think it's an interesting story first and foremost, and all the focus was on Fred West at the start. Rose West was important, but more of a peripheral figure. But yeah, everybody's got an opinion. Everybody wanted to be centre stage in that. And like I say, for a young journalist like myself, I always try to treat people with respect, and I always try and treat people like I want to be treated myself. And in a situation like that, it was quite. Like I saw that the press pack came down from London, and I was part of that press pack later, but at the time I looked at it and it was just like this. They would move from one thing to the next, all in pursuit of a story. And some of them were good people, but it was just for a young cub reporter like myself, it was quite a life-changing moment.
Yeah, and it's a huge story, isn't it, even now?
Yeah.
And you probably didn't appreciate the gravitas at the time.
No, you don't. But what I always remember was what John Flint said. He said it's going to run and run and run, and it's still running in a way, even though 25 Cromwell Street, the building's been razed to the ground. But I still remember standing at the back of that and just thinking. Actually, now I look back and say, wow, and this is what I say to people: you don't know, So be respectful.
Yeah, I agree with that. How did your career progress from there then? That was obviously some early involvement in the sort of more gruesome crimes, but you went into investigative journalism.
Yeah. So I left there. I went traveling around the world for a year. I went with my girlfriend, now wife, who I met at the Gloucestershire Echo, 30 years ago. And then I came back and got a job at the Yorkshire Evening Post. When I was away traveling, I wrote to 4 newspapers. I sent the editor postcards from each of the countries where I was at.
Love that.
Yeah, I did. I said, you don't know me. I said, but Chris Maguire, having a great time in Australia. I'm going to be applying for a job when I get back. And then I came back and I got offered 2 of those jobs. I always wanted to improve my odds because I always try and play the long game.
But I love that because that's a great example for people listening. Like, just a little bit extra effort makes you stand out a mile, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 2 people, all 4 of them, I say all 4 of them, I think all 4 of them knew who I was at the end of it. 2 of them were interested enough to meet the guy who was sending these postcards, and then they offered me a job. Now, the 2 who didn't want to meet me, would I necessarily want to work for them? Because they should want to meet me.
Yeah.
Not in an arrogant sense.
No, I completely agree. If someone's putting their head above the parapet and putting that extra effort in, they, like you say, it's increasing your odds. They should want to meet the person who's going to those efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. What I found is when I was at the Yorkshire Evening Post, I always wanted to move the dial. I always wanted to try and do extra. So I could write stories. Anybody could write stories about a car accident or, a robbery or anything. But I always wanted to make things better. I remember I had a fascination with eating disorders. And I met a guy who treated people with eating disorders in Leeds. And he was talking to me about how prevalent it was. And it was nobody reported on it. It was the Cinderella service of the NHS. And what he did is he got patients with their permission to speak to me. I remember I did an investigation and I had a picture of somebody on the front page who was like 6 stone. And I did a big investigation inside. And then I started winning awards and stuff, because I realised actually I could actually move the dial. And then I left there and I'd always wanted to work in London. So I left there and went to work at the Daily Mail. At which point, you cut the conversation short.
And that's it. Let's
that's
back
the
up.
end of the podcast. Yeah. Then I went to Daily Mail for 18 months.
What was that like as an experience?
What's your view of the Daily Mail?
Generally everyone's view is pretty negative, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what was it like inside? Because particularly that time, was it a good place to work or?
Yeah, I think the perception of the Daily Mail has got a lot worse.
Yeah.
A lot worse. But I also think from a journalistic point of view, the Daily Mail has got quite a good reputation.
Yeah, because what year would that have been? Because it's probably when
98.
Okay.
98, yeah. And I'll tell you when it was. It was around about then. You'd have to check the dates. But the Stephen Lawrence murder.
Yep.
Paul Dacre was the editor, and 5 suspects arrested, and nothing happened. And then he did a front page with the 5 suspects' faces, and he said like murderers, and if you disagree, sue us, like that. And it was a really, really powerful statement that he said at the time. I wanted to get a job at the Daily Mail, but I could only get a job shifting. So he became a contractor basically, and I was getting £84 a day to work at the Daily Mail. Parking was £22. Wow. But I was doing all the night shifts, doing a 7 till 3, 7 in the evening to 3 in the morning. And I was a dog's body. Generally, I was a dog's body. So you had your proper reporters, people who've been there for a number of years, and then they'd say to you, Chris, we want you to go to, anywhere in the country, Bristol, wherever. Want you to door knock this person. Want you to do this, want you to do that. You do all the donkey work, all the legwork.
And then they'd get the story.
And they get the credit, yeah. But, that was what life was. And I wanted to be that person. And the only way I could be that person was to actually, earn their trust and earn their respect.
And so did you get to do that there, or did you not stay long enough?
Yeah, I tell you what I did is I realised that actually I could do that forever. I could do that, and it was going to be really hard to get into the Daily Mail. So what I did, I thought, the best way of doing it is to find my own stories, because I was just like additional reporting by Chris Maguire. I wanted to be the main man. So what I did is all my days off, I'd try and find stories. And what I would do is I'd go to the back issues of the Daily Mail, and then I would follow up those stories. So I'll give you an example. There's two. There was one which was, Inspector Morse, another police analogy. So Inspector Morse, where was it filmed?
Can't remember.
Oxford.
Right.
Okay, it's filmed in Oxford. And yet the flat where he lived was in Ealing, which was quite close to where I lived. And I knocked on the door, and I spoke to the lady. I said, "I'm really sorry about it. Chris Maguire, Daily Mail, always nice." I said, "I'm doing a story about film locations," which was true. "Am I right in thinking Inspector Morse was filmed here?" And they said, "Yeah." He says, "There's his flat. Come on in." So I went into her flat, which was used as Inspector Morse's flat. And I did this story. I thought it was the best story ever. I took it to the news editor, Ian McGregor, who's a legend. And he looked at it. He said, "Well done, Chris." He said, "Going to completely rewrite it, but I like the picture." Completely rewrote it, and I was completely and utterly devastated. I was really, I'm not upset crying, but I thought, I really
you put a lot of work into that.
Yeah. Went as a page 3 story in the Daily Mail with my byline with the pictures. He made the story better, so I was just being precious. And another story was about a young kid who got diagnosed with meningitis, and he lived down in the southwest. And this was 2 years ago. And I thought to myself, if I contact them 2 years later, this little lad has either got better, he's still battling, or the worst case scenario. And it was the first one, he'd got better. So
Wow.
I did this story about, the miracle 2 years after he was on death's door, little Johnny, whatever his name is. So I did about 9 of those stories, and I got bylines for all of them. But to get 9 stories, I had to try and get 50 stories.
Yeah.
But it was a really good learning curve. But then I got married in October 1998. And I remember that I was climbing into bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. And Leah, my wife, was climbing out of bed at 6 o'clock to go to work. And I realised that actually, if we were going to have kids, that wasn't a life for me.
Yeah.
So I left the Daily Mail and went down to Bristol.
And how long were you there for?
The Daily Mail, I did 18 months, but
Yeah.
once I was a shifter, every day. I literally worked 5-6 days a week. They liked me. It was quite funny. When I was a shifter, I had my leaving due. No shifters ever got leaving dues. And I remember getting I got a leaving speech from the assistant news editor, Tim Jachiski, and I got a watch with an engraving on it from Tim.
Yeah, you weren't there very long.
I was there for 18 months, and I just thought to myself, what a nice touch that is.
Yeah.
The thing about the Daily Mail is that, and I don't like the Daily Mail. I don't. Not now. I don't like what they stand for. But from the point of view as a 24-year-old journalist, I can look out and think I know what it's like, or I can be in the inside. And I wanted to see what it was like. And it was like, you'd go to an event, you'd go to a house. There was 2 brothers were done for bombings. I think there was a name from, I'll think of it in a second. But I got sent to the house of the daughter of one of the guys who was arrested. It was a blackmailing Sainsbury's. And I'd get there at 7 o'clock in the morning. All the other journalists would turn up at 9 o'clock. And then all the other journalists would leave at 5 o'clock. And I'd phone the news desk and they'd say, stay until 7. So I was there longer than anybody else. And I remember the daughter came out. So I'm really, 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 really sorry. Genuinely, I said, but I've been out of the house all day. I'm desperate for the toilet. I said, can I use your toilet? And she said, yeah. And then I would use the toilet. And then I got talking to her. I wasn't trying to trick her, because I don't do that. I wasn't trying to trick her. Got a story, sent it back to the Daily Mail. Thought thought it was the best thing ever. They didn't use it, but what it taught me was that if I worked harder and I worked more
harder, longer,
than anybody else, then I was luckier. It's a good lesson.
It's kind of like the classic make your own luck, isn't it?
It's like
the harder. It's no coincidence that the harder people work, then the better their chances of success are.
There was a story about Gary Player, the golfer. Once again, Google it, kids. But somebody was watching him practicing from a bunker, and he was chipping in from a bunker, and then he got about 3 or 4 balls in the bunker, and some guy comes up to me and said, Gary, I've been watching you play. South African golfer always wore black. He said, you're lucky. You got 3 of your balls in. He said, you're right. He said, the longer I practice, the luckier I get. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I love that. So then you moved on to Bristol Evening Post. What were you doing there?
Investigations and campaigns. So I got married. I was 26 when I got married. So I was there. So I moved down there in 99, and then we were down there for 4 and a bit years. And I got our 2 daughters were born down in Bristol. We really liked Bristol. Really liked it. I did. I got a bit of I won awards there. I got like Journalist of the Year and Campaigning Journalist of the Year. There was. I always, once again, it always comes back to, you can be a journalist or you can try and change the world. And I always wanted to move the dial. So I did investigations of things that I thought were wrong. You mentioned before, 99% of police are good. You know, a lot of my stuff was highlighting on the 1%.
Yep.
And I used to do a lot of door knocks. And I used to wait outside people's houses. And journalists do a valid role. They do a valid role.
I agree.
I did 2 stories. One was about a guy who ran over a policeman and killed him. He put out a stinger, and this kid was running really, really fast. Was driving really, really fast in a stolen vehicle, a twok, taken without the owner's consent. And I tracked this kid down. He's about 70, 80 miles away. I took a picture of him, put him on the front page. I said, "This is the guy who killed such and such." You know, and that was quite a powerful story. But by the same token, there was a police officer who was on long-term sick leave, who was working as a bouncer in Bristol. I did the same on him. You know, I was completely even-handed.
Yeah.
I remember I went to St. Paul's, which it had a reputation. It was frequented by a lot of yardies, you know, and they're selling drugs. In this particular area. And I was doing a story about a kid who was a 1-boy crime wave, but because he was under the age of criminal consent, I think he was about 9, when he got arrested by the police, he'd say, can't touch me, like that, literally. And his mum was basically, you know, fueling that, because they knew he couldn't be arrested. And I wanted to get a picture of what this kid was like. So I went with a photographer, and I was in the back of a white van, and I got the address. We couldn't publish his name, so we had to pixelate his face. We couldn't say where we were. But I was in there, and we had this Australian photographer who was in the front, and I was in the back of this van waiting. And all I could hear, genuinely, was these yardies walking around my car. I thought it was a police, you know, walking. I could just hear the chains like that, you know, their gold jewelry. And it seemed to go on forever. And then this photographer that I was with started saying, started really panicking. And I sort of said to him, I said, be quiet, you know, like that, you know, be quiet. And then, because we've been in the car that long, there was a bottle of Lilt in the back of the car. And I can't remember if I drank it or he did, but it wasn't Lilt. It was the result of having been in the back of the car for several hours. And it spat it out. So even then, there was a comical moment from it. But yeah, I did that for about 4 years.
Did you have, because obviously, you know, given what you were investigating over, you know, a fair number of years, did you have any other like key kind of moments where you're like, this is serious? Like, because some of it's not to be messed with, is it?
100%. You know, you don't underestimate. Listen, I'm not suggesting I was some sort of superhero, because I absolutely wasn't. You got threatened. There was one guy who his partner would leave threatening messages on the answer phone. You know, like you'd hear deep breaths. The thing is that at the time, it's only as you get older and you have more responsibility that you start to think about people other than yourself. And at the time, I think we'd either had one or, you know, we didn't have the second. We didn't have our youngest daughter then. And then it made you think. And then you start to think about it, and you start to think, you know what, do I keep doing this forever? But I generally felt we were making a positive difference. And what it did, it gave the newspaper a real edge. But I mean, you've been a policeman, you've probably been a victim of all sorts.
Yeah, and I think what you said there resonated actually in that sense of, when I was young, I probably was kind of not blind to it, but certainly naive to it, and didn't, like I say, I didn't really care. It was just me. But then as I got older, I was like, this isn't probably what I should be doing.
I felt not naive. I felt bulletproof.
Yeah.
You know, I felt bulletproof at the time. I felt that actually I had right on my side. I was idealistic. And I felt the people that I was writing stories on were people who were doing bad things. And I needed to hold these people to account. I still do that now,
Yeah.
albeit I don't sit in the back of a car in a van,
Drinking someone else's urine.
drinking pish.
How did you end up in Manchester?
Well, I decided I wanted to become an editor. So I set myself a goal to be an editor by the time I was 30. I've always been driven. It's said about wanting to be a journalist. I wanted to be an editor by the time I was 30 when I was about 14. So having won the awards, and I won a number of campaigning awards as well.
Yeah, you sort of completed it, I guess.
I sort of felt that actually it was now I've done that. It's a bit like being a policeman. I think, you know, policemen who are fast tracked into, you know, officer roles and have never walked the beat, they'll never earn my respect like somebody who's put the yards in.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean to say they can't be good police officers.
No, but you haven't got that baseline foundation knowledge almost.
You haven't got the understanding of what it's like to be a victim of crime, what it's like to be the first person on the scene, and what it's like to confront somebody. You've only got what you've been taught in a classroom. That's not where you learn.
Yeah.
So having done that, I thought, you know what, I've done that side of things. I then became an assistant editor back at the Gloucestershire Echo again, and then I got offered an editorship in Chorley. You know, I was 33. My wife's family are from the northwest. She was quite keen to get back, so I became an editor at Chorley in 2006 to January 2012, and I love that, and that's how I came back to the northwest.
And how did that progress then? Because obviously you maintained as a journalist and as an employed journalist.
Yeah.
But then obviously you eventually started your own. So how did that sort of start to form? Because that's quite an interesting shift there.
Yeah. I think being an editor was quite interesting because, you know, up until that point, you've always worked for other people. And yet when you're the editor, you're in charge. So you're the captain of the ship. So you're setting the direction of travel. So I looked at the Chorley Guardian, and at the time, it was a bit like jumping into a football club that was in the bottom of the league, in the relegation zones or just above it. We were like the second worst performing newspaper in the group out of 200, which was quite some feat. But we had some really good staff there, and there's a real good willingness. And I went in there and I said, we're going to change 3 things every week. And I said, so for example, we're going to increase the story count 3-fold. Every time somebody sends us a picture, we're going to use it unless we can't. Yeah. Unless there's a picture of a kid, for example, that we're not allowed to. You know, if somebody sends us a picture of a car accident, you know, or a scene, we're going to publish it. We're going to make all the pages look a bit easier to read. Because what happened is, on the front of the page, and I don't want to get all technical with you, what would happen is it's called points of entry. So you'd have on the front page, you'd have your blurb at the top, you know, 2 or 3 things. Win £1 million, you know, win a car, you know, Chorley win at the weekend, whatever it was. And then you'd have your main story, and then you'd have like a run of nibs down the side. So when I got the paper, when I first became the editor, I think we had about 3-4 points of entry. Blurb at the top, one big massive story, and a second story down the front. And I think I went to 13 points of entry.
Wow.
So I went to 3 blurbs across the top, I think a main lead, and then a run of nibs down the side. So for the 10 weeks, I made 3 changes a week. So after 10 weeks, we had 30 changes. So we went from like 10.7% circulation fall to 0.7% up. So we went to being the second best newspaper in the group from being the second worst, you know, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's quite a transformation. That.
Yeah. And it was like, you know, I love my staff. I love my staff, but I always said to them, I said, look, you can't be first with the news, be best with the news. But I said, always remember, I said, when anybody reads your story, I said, it's the Chorley Guardian, they trust it. I said, but they might keep it for 50 years. So if there's a picture of a kid in the first day at school, I said, Nan and Granddad will buy that. And I said, Mum and Dad will buy that. So if you make a spelling mistake in that, I said they'd kept that spelling mistake for 50 years. So I did that for 6 years, and then I got to a point where I could, nearly 40, I could see the writing on the wall in terms of the cost of the newspaper was going up, the pagination was dropping. I thought, I've done it. I didn't want to then go to be an editor of another newspaper. And then the opportunity came up to get into business in Manchester. And then I went to edit the Northwest Business Insider.
And that was actually technically as like a founder, director, or what was the arrangement there?
Well, what it was is BusinessCloud's been going for about 30 odd years now, they've got a number of titles across the group. They're really focused on deal making
Yeah.
and property. They're two bags and other stuff as well. Inside, it had a really good reputation. So they asked me to be the editor of the Northwest Business Insider. The previous editor was working his notice out. That was interesting because that meant working in Manchester. It meant doing events, and it meant meeting business people. I didn't have a lot of experience meeting business people over and above my job.
Interesting.
I never hosted any events.
Because that's what everyone would know you for here now, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. But I looked at it and I thought, you know what? This would have been 2012, so I was 40 in 2012, and I got the job like just before my 40th birthday. And once again, I thought to myself, right, I'll take myself out of my comfort zone. Loved it. I continue to love it, albeit not there.
So anyone who maybe is listening to this who doesn't know what you actually do now, tell us about that.
Yeah. So I left Northwest Business Insider 2016, set BusinessCloud up. So we've been running that for 9 years. We bought it 4 years ago. So me and my business partner, John Simcox, run it. So BusinessCloud, our tagline is it's tech insight with bite. So we've got a really good following on social media, and our website traffic is really good. Went up 59% last month, which is really good.
Amazing.
We do a lot of events. So we did one in January this year called Northern Leaders, which was amazing. So last year, Howard Bernstein, God bless him, died. He was the former chief executive of Manchester City Council, Mr. Manchester. And when he died, I thought, wow, think of what he's done in his life. Think of how he's improved the North, Greater Manchester and beyond. And I thought we need to do something about that. So we came with this idea to say, let's shine a light on good leaders. So we did a list, 200 leaders from a short list, from a long list of 540 people who are making the North a better place. And then we had a Northern Leaders Awards do and dinner at KPMG on the 23rd of January. And then it was the day of the big storms. It was the day Man United played against Rangers as well. We were really worried we were going to lose a lot of people. We lost a few the day before, but on the day itself, we were hoping to get 119 and we got 118. And these were some of the biggest names in not just business, but the public sector, charities, sport. So we do a website, we do events, we do lists. We try and make the world a better place.
And it's interesting though, because obviously it's still journalism, but you're a business owner now, right?
Yeah.
How have you found that transition? Was that ever on your radar to do that?
Yeah, it's funny because there's things you look back on your life, you think, I should have done this earlier. I could have done it earlier. Yeah. And I'm really happy with the career that I've had, but I always think the thing that I'm going to do the best I haven't done.
Love that.
There was that great story, wasn't there? It was talking about the class of 1992. And Ryan Giggs and Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, they were overplaying an FA youth game against Leeds at Ellen Road. And I think Ryan Giggs was about 17 at the time, maybe younger, because he made his first team debut, I think, about the same time. And he was asked by a journalist, he said, is this your biggest achievement in football? And he said, no, I've not done it yet. And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm only like 16, whatever the age was. He said, of course I've not achieved what I want to achieve. I take the same philosophy. I'm not comparing myself to Ryan Giggs's footballing prowess. So I suddenly thought when we bought BusinessCloud 4 years ago, me and John, we wanted to put our stamp on it, and we grew it, and it was reasonably successful. But then last year, and having spoken to all these entrepreneurs all over the years, I thought to myself, I'm not really an entrepreneur. I'm not in the broadest sense of the word. And then I sat down with John and we said, look, if we want to get to where we want to get to, we need to have a plan to get there. I said, we need to have an office. We need to recruit people. We can't recruit people if we haven't got an office. So we took out an office. This is a wonderful space you've got here. We went to Fire Up in Rochdale because it was closer to where John lives. Made our first hire, brought in some expertise, some external help, loosely a non-exec director, but an entrepreneur that I've got a lot of respect for. He sat down with us. He looked at what we were doing. He said, right, where do you want to get to? How do you want to get to there? And suddenly in the last 15 months, we've doubled turnover. We've doubled we've really increased our traffic. The events we've done have been a lot better. So I feel now at the age of 52, I'm not going to say I feel like a proper entrepreneur,
No, but you've got a proper North Star now to aim for.
I know exactly what I'm aiming at. I know exactly what I want.
And out of interest, what is that? Where do you see it going in the next sort of few years?
I think the thing is that the media haven't got the best reputation.
Yep.
And that people don't tend to trust the media, so I want to be somebody that's trusted. Me personally as a brand, me personally as Chris, and also the BusinessCloud brand. So I want to create something which there's that FOMO effect. So if I have an event, I want people to want to be there. I want people to give up their time to speak to me, to do stuff for BusinessCloud because they trust us and they trust me. And I want to make a really positive difference in everything that I do. Can I share a story if that's okay?
Please do.
So myself and you are both fans of LinkedIn. I bet you're not on TikTok, are you?
I'm not.
No. I'm not on TikTok.
Not many bald white males on TikTok.
No, I don't think we're the target demographic. But I got into Instagram last year. I wanted to see what my kids were doing because they were on Facebook. Yeah, exactly. And he told me if they ever followed him on Facebook, they were going to exit Facebook. So I thought need to follow him on Instagram, which I did. But LinkedIn during COVID, when I was at home, I thought to myself, there's a danger of me not being relevant here. I'm feeling disconnected with Manchester and the Northwest generally because I'm sitting at home in the People's Republic of Chorley. So I started a good news blog every Friday on LinkedIn. And what I did is I scoured all the press and I thought, you know what, there's all this negative stuff. I'm going to hit back with some positive news. So I wrote a good news blog every Friday. And it takes about 3 hours. I've been doing that for 5 years. It's had about 5 million impressions in that time. I've met loads of people, grown my network on LinkedIn. I think I've made a positive change. And then 2 years ago, I got treated for skin cancer at the top of my head. I've got a big head, as mentioned earlier. But I had a little spot at the top of it, and it would drop off and it would come back. It was persistent. Went to the doctors and they said, "Going to refer you, to an expert." He looked at it, Dr. Ramouche, and he said, "That's basal cell carcinoma." I said, "All right, what's that then?" He said, "I knew it was a cancer." So it's if you're going to get one, Chris, that's the one to get.
Yeah.
He said, "We'll cut it out." So he cut it out in the January 2 years ago, 2023. You can't really see it because I'm quite tall and it's under my hairline. So I said to him, I took a picture after he told me it was basal cell carcinoma. I said, "Can I take a picture with you?" He said, "Why?" He said, "I want to do a story about it." He said, "No one's ever done that before when they've been told they've got skin cancer." I said, "Yeah." I said, but if somebody hadn't spotted it, I wouldn't know I've got it.
Yeah.
I said, so there's other people out there
you can use it as an opportunity to raise that awareness.
There's other people out there with spots or moles that they're ignoring. So I wrote this story with a smiling picture of me. And I think because I know how to shape a story.
Sure.
So I said, this picture was taken 2 minutes after I got told I had basal cell carcinoma. I said, it's on top of my head. It was an innocuous mole. Didn't think anything about it. Turned out to be skin cancer. I play a lot of cricket. I said, so if you play a lot of cricket, you play golf. And I said, you're not covering your head or you're not covering your arms. I said, and you think you're bulletproof, you're not. And then wrote it. 5 people messaged me privately and said, "Chris, we're getting tested. We've seen it. We want to thank you," that sort of thing. And then last week, a guy posted on LinkedIn, which he tagged me into. He said, 2 years ago, I read an article by Chris Maguire about his skin cancer. I had a mole on my arm. Didn't think anything of it. Went to the doctors. Doctor said it was a very early stage 1 cancer. And he said he had a scar of about 4 inches on his arm. He said he's got the all clear now. He said, "I'm writing this because I want to pay it forward." He said, "That's what I want to do." So whatever I want to do, whatever we want to do with BusinessCloud, whatever my kids do, I want to make the world a better place. If that doesn't sound sweet.
That's Chris Maguire, owner and executive editor of BusinessCloud and TechBlast. Thank you so much for listening to the show this week, and please make sure to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss a new episode of the show. And don't forget to check out Ministry of Work, where you can join our exclusive work club. This episode was produced, recorded and edited right here at Ministry of Work, with a special thanks to our studio manager Dan Brown and, of course, to you for listening. I'm Eddie Whittingham, and this has been Greater Manchester's Greatest Minds.